The gray light of an early October morning settled over the Cook County Circuit Court, casting long, cold shadows across the marble floors. Inside one of the family courtrooms, silence hovered like a heavy curtain as Martha Bennett sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. Her hands rested in her lap, still composed, almost too calm for a woman about to finalize the end of a 14-year marriage. The door opened, and Alan Bennett strode in with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. His charcoal suit looked freshly tailored, his watch glittered under the overhead lights, and his smirk held the kind of triumph that didn't need to be spoken aloud. He gave Martha a brief, almost pitying glance before taking his seat beside his attorney. The hearing began with procedural formalities, the clerk's voice echoing off the courtroom walls. Then Alan's attorney stood, straightening his tie as if preparing for a performance. "Your Honor," he began, "my client seeks primary rights to the marital residence, the lakeside cabin in Wisconsin, the BMW X5, and all joint savings and investment accounts. Mr. Bennett has shouldered the financial burden of this marriage for years. It is only equitable that these assets remain with him." Alan leaned back, arms crossed, nodding as though the judge should simply sign off on everything. Across the aisle, Martha slowly rose to her feet. There was no tremor in her voice, no visible hesitation. "I waive all claims," she said. Judge Karen Whitmore looked up sharply. "Mrs. Bennett, you understand what that means. You are relinquishing your legal right to every marital asset listed before the court." "I understand," Martha replied. Alan couldn't contain himself. He let out a muffled laugh, unable to hide his disbelief. Under the table, his phone buzzed. He slipped it open and typed quickly, the corners of his mouth lifting. She gave up everything. He hit send. The message flew to Alexis Carter within seconds. Judge Whitmore narrowed her eyes. "Mrs. Bennett, the court requires confirmation you are not acting under pressure or coercion." "I'm not," Martha said calmly. "This is my decision." The judge studied her for a long moment before signaling the clerk to hand over the stack of documents. One by one, Martha signed, deliberate, unhurried, with a clarity that unsettled even the clerk passing the pages across the table. When the final signature was placed, the decree was entered. All marital property, the suburban home, the lakeside cabin, the BMW, and every joint account, was officially transferred to Alan Bennett. Alan exhaled triumphantly, already imagining the evening he would spend celebrating. Martha simply gathered her handbag, thanked the court staff, and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps were soft, but her expression was unreadable, steady, almost serene. Outside, in the cool air of the courthouse steps, she pulled out her phone and typed a single message. "Everything's ready. See you tomorrow at 10. She sent it, slipped the phone back into her pocket, and disappeared into the crowds of downtown Chicago. The cafe across from the courthouse was quiet at mid-morning, its large windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Martha stepped in, still carrying the lingering chill of the October air on her coat. The aroma of roasted coffee grounded her, even as the events of the courtroom echoed faintly in her mind. Near the back, a man in his early 60s stood as soon as he saw her. His gray suit was conservative, impeccably pressed, and his expression carried a gravity she recognized from her years watching attorneys navigate tense conversations. "Martha," he greeted softly, "I'm Leonard Bishop. Thank you for meeting on such short notice." She shook his hand and took a seat, her posture composed but alert. She had expected this meeting, just not today, not so soon. Leonard placed a leather folder on the table before speaking again. "I'm afraid I have difficult news. Your father passed away last week." His words landed with a muted weight. Martha blinked once, her breath catching for a moment before settling again. Her father's absence from her life had been years long, but this finality still felt sharp. Leonard continued gently. He named you as his sole heir. He opened the folder, sliding several documents toward her. You now own Bennett Premier Auto Group, 7 dealerships across the Chicago region, valued between $22 and $28 million. Martha stared at the papers, tracing the embossed letterhead with her eyes. She had never imagined anything like this. Her father had built his empire alone, refusing contact for reasons she'd never understood, reasons that had cut deeply for years. Leonard reached into the folder once more and withdrew a sealed envelope. He left you this. Her father's handwriting stretched across the front, steady, familiar, painfully distant. Martha broke the seal with careful fingers. The letter inside was brief, but dense with truth she had waited too long to hear. He wrote that he had never stopped loving her, that the silence between them had not been his choice. And then the part her eyes lingered on, Alan threatened him. He had shown up years ago, demanding money and influence. When her father refused, Alan escalated, threatening to expose fabricated scandals that would destroy the business. Terrified of losing everything he'd built, and believing that distance would protect her, her father cut Martha out. He wrote that he regretted it every day, that he wished he had been stronger. He apologized for the pain, for the absence, for the years he could never return. Fear had ruled him, and he hoped she would one day understand. When Martha finished reading, she folded the letter slowly, pressing the crease with steady hands. Her face did not break, nor did her voice, but something inside her aligned, quietly, firmly. Her resolve sharpened. She finally understood the full shape of the betrayal. The afternoon light had already begun to shift when Martha stepped into a quiet conference room inside a downtown Chicago bank. The blinds were half drawn, filtering the sun into pale stripes across the table. Waiting there was Victoria Hayes, her longtime friend and one of the few people Martha still trusted. Victoria stood as Martha entered, offering a small, steadying smile. "I got everything you asked for," she said, tapping a thick envelope resting in front of her. Martha took a seat. "Show me." Victoria exhaled, then unfolded several documents with the precision of someone who knew their contents could alter the course of a life. "These are confidential," she warned softly. "I risked my job pulling them." She slid the first set of papers toward Martha. They were loan agreements, 3 separate accounts opened over the past 2 years. Each bore Martha's name, her social security number, and her supposed signature. "The total balance," Victoria said carefully, "is between $450,000 and $600,000. Martha's eyes moved slowly down the pages. The numbers blurred for a moment, then refocused. Every line of credit had been maxed out. Payment schedules were overdue. The risk classifications were marked in red. This isn't mine," Martha murmured. "I know," Victoria replied, "but the system thinks differently. These were opened using your identity." She pulled out more documents, wire transfers, cash withdrawals, payment records. Each transaction traced back to the same place, Alan's failing dealership business. Every dollar siphoned from the fraudulent loans had gone straight into keeping his collapsing empire afloat. Victoria continued, her voice tightening. "Look here." She pointed to the signature fields. "These too are obvious forgeries. Different angles, pressure, stroke direction. And the third, I'm almost sure he had you sign this when he put a stack of paperwork in front of you. Probably told you it was something routine." A memory stirred. Nights when Alan shoved forms across the kitchen island, assuring her they were just business documents he needed her to initial. She had trusted him. She had signed without reading. Victoria then laid down the final blow: employment verification forms, fake pay stubs, fabricated tax filings, all showing Martha as a high-earning corporate officer in Alan's company. You were never on payroll, Victoria said. But he needed the banks to believe you had a six-figure income, so the loans would be approved. Martha stared at the stack of lies, each one carefully constructed, each one designed to use her as a shield while he gambled with debt and deception. The scale of it settled over her like a cold weight. For the first time, she fully saw the extent of Alan's betrayal. Not just emotional, not just personal. It was criminal. It was calculated. And it had been happening right in front of her, disguised as trust. The late afternoon settled into a muted gold as Martha returned to her small apartment. She had barely taken off her coat when a firm knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, Greg Ruiz, the private investigator she had quietly hired weeks ago, stood in the hallway holding a thick black folder. "Ms. Bennett," he said with a respectful nod. "I have everything." She stepped aside, letting him in. Greg placed the folder on the kitchen table and remained standing, giving her a moment to steady herself. When she was ready, he opened the folder and spread out several photographs. The first image struck like a blow. Alan, laughing openly, one arm wrapped around Alexis Carter, a woman nearly 15 years younger. They were walking hand in hand down a River North street, oblivious to anyone around them. "This has been going on for 3 years, Greg said. "Longer than you suspected." He laid out more photos. Alan entering Alexis's building at night, Alexis riding in the BMW, the two of them dining together at upscale restaurants Martha had never once visited. Greg tapped a rental contract next. "This is the lease to Alexis's loft," he said. "River North. 2-bedroom corner unit. Very expensive." Martha scanned the numbers. $3, $200 per month, plus utilities, parking, security deposit. Greg continued. "Every payment traces back to the fraudulent loans opened under your identity." Alan rerouted the funds through his business accounts, then paid her rent from there. "It's all documented." Martha absorbed this in silence. The betrayal felt bigger each time a new page turned. Not just infidelity, but theft disguised as romance. Funded by the pieces of her life Alan stole without hesitation. Greg moved on to the next set of papers. These showed spreadsheets, bank statements, and internal reports. "His dealership group is drowning," he said plainly. Debt piled up long before he met Alexis, without the fraudulent credit lines tied to your name. His business would have collapsed 2 years ago. He pointed to a red-circled figure. "This is the amount of cash he funneled into emergency payroll last winter." Another chunk went into overdue supplier invoices. He wasn't managing a company. He was patching holes in a sinking ship. Martha closed her eyes briefly, letting the truth settle. Every loan he forged, every false signature he pressed into documents, it wasn't just selfishness. It was desperation wrapped in deception. "And Alexis?" she asked quietly. "She's been pressuring him to end your marriage," Greg said. "She believes they'll move into your suburban home. She doesn't know the house is already buried in liens." Martha opened her eyes again, steady. "I started this the day my father told me the truth," she said. "I knew Alan had done something. I just didn't know how deep it went." Greg nodded with understanding. "You know everything now, and you have everything you need." Martha gathered the pages into a neat stack. Betrayal no longer clouded her vision. It clarified it. The full picture had finally come into view, and she was ready for what came next. Gibson's steakhouse glowed with warm amber light that spilled across polished wood tables and crisp white linens. The dinner rush hummed around them. Laughter, clinking glasses, murmured conversations. But at a secluded booth near the back, Alan Bennett held court like a man who believed the world finally belonged to him. Across from him, Alexis Carter twirled a strand of hair around her finger, her smile bright and unrestrained. She raised her glass of Cristal champagne, the bubbles catching reflections from the chandelier overhead. "To us," she said. her eyes gleaming with triumph. Alan leaned back, savoring the moment. The expensive champagne, the rich scent of prime steak searing nearby, the soft music drifting above diners, it all fed into the feeling that he had truly won. He clinked his glass against hers. "To a fresh start," he replied. "No more obstacles." They ordered lavishly: fillets, crab cakes, truffle mashed potatoes, oysters, and 2 more bottles of champagne. Alan insisted on the finest of everything. After all, why shouldn't he? He had just walked out of the courthouse with every property, every account, every asset transferred neatly under his name. She really just gave it all up? Alexis asked between sips, disbelief laced with excitement. Alan smirked, didn't even blink, signed everything. Martha is predictable like that, too soft, too cautious. She never understood business the way I do. Alexis leaned closer across the table. Good, because once the house is ours, I want to redo everything. New flooring, new kitchen, maybe even tear down that awful wall in the living room. Alan chuckled. Whatever you want. It's our house now. And the cabin, she pressed. Sell it, right? We could use that money for something better. Of course, Alan said. It's outdated anyway. She grinned. I've been thinking maybe we could buy a place in Miami. Somewhere right on the water. Imagine waking up to the ocean every day. Alan pictured it. Sunlight, beaches, luxury. A future far removed from the grayness of Chicago's fall. We'll make it happen, he promised. He felt invincible, untouchable, like a man who had outsmarted everyone, especially Martha. He didn't notice the waiter glancing at him with the polite detachment reserved for guests who tipped big but demanded more. He didn't notice the bill climbing past $1,000. He didn't see the faint lines of strain forming at Alexis's mouth when she wondered how soon she would get her hands on the house keys. All he felt was victory. And yet, beneath the warm glow of Gibson's, the truth waited, silent and sharp. Neither of them had the slightest idea what the next morning would bring. The sun had barely begun to push through the clouds when Alan Bennett's phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. He groaned, reached for it, and answered without checking the caller ID. "Mr. Bennett," a firm voice said, "this is North Shore Credit Union. We're calling regarding your outstanding balance of $150,000. Payment is due immediately. Your grace period has expired." Alan sat up sharply. "What balance?" "That loan isn't." The line went cold as the representative repeated the amount. "If we do not receive payment today, the account will enter collection status." He hung up mid-sentence, heart pounding. Before he could steady himself, the phone rang again. This time it was Liberty Bank Chicago. "Mr. Bennett, we're calling about your $200,000 line of credit. We were informed of your recent marital property settlement. As the legal recipient of those assets, the responsibility for repayment now falls entirely on you. We need to schedule immediate payment or restructuring." Alan's mouth went dry. "There must be a mistake," he snapped. "My ex-wife, handled those accounts." "No, sir," the representative replied. "They were opened under her identity, but the collateral was tied to marital assets. Under Illinois law, the debt transfers with the assets. You now own those assets. Therefore, you now own the debt." Alan's hand trembled. Sweat began to collect at his hairline. He didn't even have time to breathe before the third call came. "Mr. Bennett, this is Midland Commercial Lending. We need to discuss the $120,000 business loan connected to Bennett Premier Auto Group. Now that the marital settlement has been finalized, the loan has legally transferred to you." Alan felt the room shift. "Transferred? What are you talking about?" "The debt was assigned to the business and the marital estate. You accepted full ownership yesterday. By law. That makes you the sole party responsible." The call ended with a curt reminder. "Failure to pay will result in legal action." Alan stared at the ceiling, the weight of the numbers spinning through his mind. $150,000, $200,000, $120,000. His stomach lurched. He threw on clothes and bolted out the door, barely locking it behind him. Traffic blurred as he sped to his attorney's office, ignoring red lights, gripping the steering wheel as if it could hold his life together. Inside the quiet lobby of the law firm, he nearly shouted, "I need to speak to Mark. Now." His attorney, Mark Lydon, appeared minutes later, his expression unreadable. They stepped into a conference room. Alan slammed his hands on the table. "Tell me the banks are wrong. Tell me Martha is still responsible." Mark adjusted his glasses slowly. "Alan, they're not wrong." "No," Alan whispered. "You accepted every marital asset," Mark continued. "By doing so, you also accepted every liability legally attached to those assets. That includes the loans Alan opened under Martha's identity. Illinois law is very clear." Alan staggered back a step. "The total," Mark added, "far exceeds your available cash flow. Your business can't absorb this." The truth hit him harder than any betrayal he had ever imagined. His empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Martha's modest apartment sat on the second floor of an aging brick building in a quiet neighborhood just west of downtown. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and detergent, a stark contrast to the polished marble and designer furniture Alan Bennett had surrounded himself with for years. Inside, sunlight filtered gently through thin curtains, illuminating a space that was small but uncluttered, peaceful in a way Martha hadn't felt in a long time. The peace didn't last. The front door burst open so hard it rattled against the wall. Alan stormed inside, his face flushed, breath ragged, panic simmering beneath his anger. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted, slamming the door behind him. "The banks are calling nonstop. They're saying I owe everything. All of it." Martha looked up from the kitchen table, where she had been reviewing documents from Leonard Bishop. She didn't flinch. She didn't even rise at first. Instead, she closed the folder gently, as if he were nothing more than an interruption. When she finally stood, her voice was steady. "I never opened those accounts, Alan." "You did." Alan blinked, thrown off by her calmness. "Don't play games with me. These loans, these balances, they're under your name." "Yes," she said, "because you forged my signatures, or you slipped documents into piles you asked me to sign after dinner. You know exactly how those accounts were opened." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His fury faltered for the first time, replaced by something sharp and frightened. "And I told you," Martha continued, "for years. Read what you sign. You never listened." Alan stepped closer, his voice cracking. "You set me up." Martha shook her head. "No, you set yourself up. You accepted every marital asset in the divorce. Every house, every car, every account, all taken proudly under your own name. And with them," she paused, "came every liability you created." The realization hit him visibly. His shoulders slumped. His eyes widened with the dawning understanding that the mess swallowing him whole had been built by his own hands, brick by reckless brick. This can't be happening," he whispered. "It is," Martha replied, "and it's legal. Every step of it." For a moment, Alan looked small, lost even. A man who had believed himself untouchable, now standing among the ruins of his own arrogance. Martha picked up her coat and handbag. She walked past him, stopping only long enough to look him directly in the eyes. "I have more important work now," she said quietly. Then she opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and left him standing alone in the modest apartment he once mocked, surrounded not by luxury, but by the truth he had spent years refusing to see. The news reached Alexis Carter on a Thursday afternoon, delivered in a frantic, half-coherent phone call from Alan. She had been sitting at her vanity in the river North Loft he paid for every month, applying lipstick, humming to herself, imagining the new life she believed was finally within reach. But when she heard the words debt, banks, collections, frozen accounts, her expression darkened. She demanded he come over immediately. The moment Alan stepped into the loft, Alexis launched at him. "You're broke?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the exposed brick walls. "You told me everything was under control." Alan reached for her, desperate. "It's temporary. A misunderstanding." "Martha! Martha!" she shrieked. "So this is her fault now? You promised we were moving into that house. You promised." She grabbed her designer handbag, white leather, gold hardware, and hurled it at him with full force. It hit his shoulder, then crashed against the hardwood floor. "Get out!" she shouted. "I'm not living with a man who can't even cover his own debt." "Alexis, please, out." When he hesitated, she pointed at the door with shaking hands. "Take your lies with you." Alan, left with the thud of the door slamming behind him, lodging itself in his chest like a final verdict. The next morning at Bennett Premier Auto Group, whispers rippled through the showroom. Employees glanced at Alan with a mix of curiosity and unease. Word had gotten around. The man who once strutted through the dealership like a king now looked disheveled, hollow-eyed, his confidence shredded. One of his sales managers pulled him aside. "2 of our financing partners just canceled pending contracts," he whispered. "They said there are concerns about stability." Within hours, 3 more partners withdrew. Suppliers who had extended credit for years suddenly demanded upfront payment only. No exceptions. No grace periods. Alan opened his laptop to transfer funds and froze. Every account read the same message. "Temporarily restricted. Contact your bank." His stomach dropped. Before he could process the panic clawing at his ribs, he heard a commotion outside. Through the glass windows, he saw a tow truck back into the parking lot. His BMW, the one he prided himself on, the one he believed symbolized success, was lifted in the air as employees gathered to watch. Someone muttered, "Wow, that's rough." Another whispered, "I knew something was off." Alan stood there, motionless, heat burning behind his eyes as the car was carried away like an indictment. By the end of the week, the blows came faster than he could absorb them. A sheriff's notice arrived. His home would be seized for auction. Then the lakeside cabin. Then the investment accounts. Everything he had gloated over, everything he had flaunted during the divorce, was stripped away in a matter of days. Each night, Alan sat alone in a cramped rental, surrounded by empty bottles, staring into the dimness with a blank expression. His empire was gone. His pride was gone. His certainty was gone. And somewhere between the silence and the sting of another drink, he realized the truth he had refused to see. Martha had understood him far better than he ever understood her. The conference room on the 24th floor of the law firm overlooked downtown Chicago, but neither of the people sitting inside paid attention to the city skyline. The carpet was thick, the walls lined with framed certificates, and the air carried the faint scent of coffee and tension. At one end of the polished table sat Martha Bennett, composed as always, her attorney beside her with a neatly organized folder of documents. Across from them sat Alan Bennett, slumped in his chair, his attorney trying and failing to maintain some semblance of professionalism while his client crumbled. Alan's eyes were bloodshot, his movements jittery. He looked nothing like the smug man who had strutted into the divorce hearing days earlier. The moment the door closed, Alan leaned forward, desperation pouring out of him. "Martha, please," he said, his voice cracking. "We need to talk. Just the 2 of us. I can fix this. I'll fix everything." Martha didn't respond. Her expression remained unreadable, her posture steady and upright. Alan pressed on, words tumbling out. "I'll give everything back. The house, the cabin, all of it. I didn't think, I just need time. Just give me a chance. Please." Her attorney interjected calmly, "Mr. Bennett? The properties have already been seized or scheduled for auction by the banks. They are no longer assets you can give back." Alan turned to Martha, ignoring the attorney. "But we can work something out. You can help me pay off the debts. You have the dealership group now. You have resources. You can—" Martha finally spoke, her voice even and controlled. "Your business is underwater, Alan. Every financial partner has pulled out. The dealership group you used to control is unsellable now. It's drowning in liabilities." Alan shook his head violently, as if refusing to let the truth settle. No, you don't understand. If you help me, if you loan me something, anything, I can rebuild. I can make us whole again." "There is no us," Martha said quietly. Alan's shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked around the room, at the attorneys, at the papers, at the evidence of his own undoing. Then something inside him broke. He pushed away from the table and collapsed to his knees in front of Martha. "Please," he begged, voice raw, hands shaking. "I'm begging you. Help me. I can't do this. I don't know what to do." His attorney looked away. Martha's attorney remained still. Martha didn't flinch. She stared at Alan, at the man who had deceived her, stolen from her, threatened her family, and laughed when he thought he'd won. "You chose this path years ago," she said. The room fell silent. Alan stayed kneeling, trembling, the weight of his choices finally crushing him. Martha stood, gathered her documents, and walked out, leaving him to face the consequences he had spent years creating. It happened on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where the air felt heavy and unforgiving. Alan Bennett had barely unlocked the door to his temporary rental when two unmarked sedans pulled up to the curb. Within seconds, investigators from the Illinois Department of Financial Regulation were climbing the steps toward him. Alan Bennett, one of the masked. Alan's throat tightened. "Yes, you're under investigation for identity theft, forgery, and large-scale financial fraud. We need you to come with us." Before he could protest, they presented a warrant. The edges of the paper blurred as his knees weakened. Neighbors peeked through blinds. A delivery driver paused mid-step. The humiliation was instant, sharp, and suffocating. Inside the precinct, the charges were laid out with cold precision. He had used Martha's identity to open multiple credit lines. He had falsified employment records. He had diverted funds to keep his failing business alive. And he had done it knowingly, systematically. When Alan tried to deny it, the investigators produced the evidence. Forensic handwriting experts had compared the signatures on the loan documents with authenticated samples of Martha's writing. The conclusion was clear. The signatures were forged, with stroke inconsistencies and pressure variations impossible to dispute. Then came the bank representatives, one after another. They testified that Alan had submitted documents filled with misrepresentations, phony pay stubs, fake tax filings, inflated valuations. They detailed his evasive responses, his shifting explanations, the red flags he ignored. Alan's attorney attempted to interrupt, to soften the accusations, but the weight of the testimony was crushing. Every detail painted the same picture: a man who had manipulated the system and stolen from the person who trusted him most. By the end of the day, Alan was booked into the Cook County Jail. The steel door clanged behind him as he was led into a holding cell. He sat on the hard bench, staring at the gray wall, the sound of distant shouts echoing through the corridor. His reputation, once polished, once envied, fell apart faster than he could comprehend. Former partners released statements distancing themselves from him. Employees whispered about how the signs were always there. The dealership's remaining supporters backed out within hours. And Alexis? She didn't show up at the jail. She didn't call. She didn't send a message. Within a week, gossip circulated that she was already dating a wealthy rival businessman, a man who owned a luxury import dealership in the suburbs. She appeared at events on his arm, smiling. dressed in new designer clothes, as if Alan had never existed. Meanwhile, Alan spent his days in a cramped cell, waiting for trial. The hours blurred together, gray walls, metal bars, the stale smell of institutional air. There was no laughter now, no arrogance, no champagne, only silence and the gnawing realization that everything he had built, everything he had taken pride in, everything he had tried to manipulate was gone, and it was his own doing. The courtroom was packed long before the hearing began. Reporters crowded near the front row, notebooks open, cameras ready. Spectators whispered behind their hands, drawn by the scandal of a once successful businessman facing charges of fraud, forgery, and identity theft. The air buzzed with anticipation. At the defense table, Alan Bennett sat rigid, his suit wrinkled, his face pale and drawn. He glanced nervously at the cameras, as if still hoping to salvage some fragment of dignity. His attorney whispered final instructions, but Alan barely heard them. His mind churned with dread. Across the room, Martha Bennett entered quietly with her attorney. She wore a simple navy dress, her posture steady, her expression calm. Reporters shifted, sensing the gravity she carried. Not dramatic, not loud, but unmistakably strong. When Judge Whitmore took the bench, the room fell silent. "Call your first witness," he said. Martha was sworn in, then took her seat at the witness stand. The room leaned forward, collectively. Her attorney began gently, "Mrs. Bennett, can you tell the court where you were on January 12th of last year?" Martha opened a folder and slid forward a stack of documents. "At St. Mary's Hospital," she said. "I had pneumonia and was hospitalized for 3 days." The documents were projected on screen. Hospital admission records, nursing charts, treatment logs, all time-stamped during the same period the largest fraudulent loan had been opened under her name. Gasps rippled through the audience. Her attorney continued, "Mrs. Bennett, were you physically capable of signing loan documents during that time?" "No," she answered simply. "I was sedated and on 4 medication." Next came dates of other loans, each cross-referenced with medical records, work logs, and travel receipts, placing Martha far from any bank branch. Then came the emotional core of her testimony. She spoke calmly about the years of betrayal, the trust she placed in Alan, the documents he had slipped into stacks for her to sign without explanation, the financial control he exercised over their marriage. Her voice never wavered. She didn't dramatize. She didn't accuse. She simply told the truth. And the truth was devastating. Even members of the jury looked moved. When the defense called Alan to the stand, his confidence faltered immediately. His voice shook as he tried to justify his actions. I was trying to save the business," he insisted. "I didn't mean to hurt Martha. Things were falling apart." Under cross-examination, he admitted partial guilt. Then more, and more. His excuses thinned with each question, unraveling until there was nothing left but the bare reality of his choices. Hours later, Judge Whitmore delivered the verdict. He spoke slowly, with the weight of authority shaped by decades on the bench. "Alan Bennett, you are hereby sentenced to 2 years of probation, mandatory financial oversight, and full restitution totaling approximately $550,000. Alan sagged in his seat, tears brimming. Then something rare happened. Judge Whitmore turned fully toward Martha. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, his tone unexpectedly warm, "your composure, clarity, and integrity throughout these proceedings have been extraordinary. This court recognizes the strength required to endure what you have endured. Let the record reflect that your testimony was essential in bringing the truth to light." The courtroom fell completely silent. Then, slowly, respectfully, people began to nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of justice finally served. Martha lowered her eyes for a moment, not in weakness, but in quiet acceptance. The truth had spoken, and she had been vindicated. 3 months after the verdict, Chicago felt different to Martha Bennett, not because the skyline had changed, or because the January frost had finally melted into early spring, but because she herself had changed. The woman who once walked through life quietly, cautiously, had stepped into something larger, something truer, and she wasn't looking back. Bennett Premier Auto Group buzzed with a new kind of energy the moment Martha stepped into the executive office her father had once occupied. Employees straightened when she walked past, not out of fear but out of respect. Her leadership was unlike anything they had seen. Calm, strategic, empathetic, and razor-sharp all at once. Under her guidance, the company shifted focus. She streamlined operations, renegotiated supplier contracts, and replaced outdated systems with efficient digital platforms. For the first time in years, revenues surged. Customer satisfaction climbed. Long-time employees said they finally felt hopeful again. A senior manager captured the mood best during a staff meeting. "Your father built this place," he said, "but you're the one giving it a future." Martha didn't cry, though she felt the emotion swell inside her chest. Victoria Hayes, sharp, brilliant, loyal, became not just her advisor, but one of her closest confidants. Together, they shaped a vision that went far beyond business. They founded the Elena Bennett Foundation, named after Martha's mother. Its mission was simple and urgent: help women facing financial abuse, coercion, and manipulation. Women who, like Martha once had, signed documents they didn't understand, trusted partners who betrayed them, or lost control of their own resources. The foundation provided legal counsel, emergency funds, financial literacy training, and, most importantly, a safe community. At the launch event, donors and advocates filled the ballroom at the Drake Hotel. Applause thundered when Martha took the stage. But afterward, in the quieter corner of the reception hall, she heard a familiar voice. "Martha Bennett? I can't believe it. It's been, 30 years?" She turned and saw Dr. Austin Reynolds, an old college classmate, now a distinguished cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. His smile was warm, his presence steady. He had aged gracefully, his hair touched with silver, his posture confident without arrogance. They talked for nearly an hour about life, about losses, about second chances. He listened with a gentleness that felt foreign compared to the harshness she had endured for years. Austin asked, "Would you like to grab dinner sometime?" There was no pressure in his tone, no urgency, just sincerity. And Martha, for the first time in a long while, felt something open inside her. "Yes," she said, smiling. "I'd like that." Their first dinners were slow and easy, their conversations thoughtful. No grand declarations, no rushing, just two adults rebuilding their lives, side by side, with patience and curiosity. Through the foundation, Martha met Lena, a 20-year-old college student who'd escaped an abusive home with nothing but a backpack and a scholarship letter. She was intelligent, determined, and heartbreakingly alone. Martha instinctively recognized the girl she once had been. Over time, their bond grew, small conversations turning into shared dinners, shared concerns, shared laughter. Then one afternoon, Lena asked quietly, "Why are you helping me so much?" Martha answered with a truth she had only recently learned to say aloud, "Because someone should have helped me when I was your age." Months later, after background checks and legal steps, Martha opened her home to Lena, not as charity, not as obligation, but as a new beginning for them both. Lena cried when she signed the papers. Martha held her close. For the first time, the word family felt whole again. That summer evening, the city glimmered beneath her, reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new penthouse overlooking the Chicago River. The balcony stretched wide, lined with soft lights that cast a warm glow over glass railings. The breeze carried faint sounds of traffic and distant music. Life moving forward. Martha stepped outside, her hands resting lightly on the railing. Below her, the skyline pulsed with energy. Behind her, Lena was studying at the dining table. Austin would arrive soon for dinner. For the first time in years, Martha felt completely free. Not because Alan was gone, not because justice had been served, but because she had reclaimed every piece of herself he once tried to take. She understood now that freedom, dignity, and self-respect were worth far more than any house, car, or savings account he had stolen. The night air wrapped around her like a promise. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading. She was healing. She was becoming. And her future finally belonged entirely to her.